Sweep Unplugged. Sweep Unplugged. Exclusive interviews with Rudy and the crew. Let's go.
Hey, good evening or good afternoon, Sweep the League Nation. This is another podcast we've launched here, Sweeps Unplugged, where we kind of unplug from our everyday talk between myself, Derek Gervin, and Coach Gio. Shout out to Shemaya on the beats, our executive producer, again, launching Sweep Unplugged, kind of unplugging from the rest of the stuff that we do when it comes to NFL and all-day NBA and all the regular sports talk you get from all of us here at Sweep the League. We've got another great episode today. We're going to be joined by Mr. Karl Darden of Navy Sports Nation. We're going to talk some Navy football. And for Spurs fans, obviously, you know about a former Naval guy that just so happened to be a pretty decent NBA player. We're going to talk a little bit about, of course, the Admiral himself, David Robinson. But let's not waste any time here. Let's bring in our special guest, Mr. Karl Darden. Mr. Darden, we appreciate you joining us here for Sweep Unplugged. And no pressure, you're guest number 2 on the new podcast series that we've got. So I'm happy to have you on and to talk some Navy sports with you, sir.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Rudy. I appreciate it. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So you started Navy Sports Nation. Can you kind of go into that? You know, you started Navy Sports Nation. You've got Navy Sports Nation blog. They can catch you at navysportsnation.com. Give the fans a little bit of oversight when it comes to the Navy Sports Nation podcast and blog.
Sure thing. I basically got this going about, I would say the blog came first, and it was about in 2020. I remember because it was right before the pandemic started and canceled all of the spring sports. So the timing wasn't the best on starting a sports podcast. I mean, starting a sports blog when all the sports get canceled, but it all worked out because I spent the first 6 or 7 months just kind of doing these retro look back pieces, you know, writing up things on how, you know, the triple option came of age in Navy football and just different stories. And then about a year later, I started the podcast. So that would have been in the spring of 2021. So this has been going on for about 3.5 years or so. And it all got started because our class, I'm from the Naval Academy class of 84, and we have a Facebook page. And I'd just make little comments on the football games from time to time. And then it started morphing into entire breakdowns of the game, you know, just a deep analysis. And then somebody suggested the blog, and then of course the podcast followed. But yeah, I've been at it for basically 3.5 years with the podcast, 4.5. I don't write the blog quite so much now because the podcast takes up a lot of time. But every once in a while you'll run across something that is it's a good idea to do it as a written feature as well as featuring it on the podcast. So I do a little bit of both still.
Yeah, so it's Navy Sports Central podcast. Again, we're talking to Karl Darden. NavySportsNation.com is where they can get your work at. Be sure to go check him out. 100%. You know, I started reading a lot of it. I started taking a look at a lot of it. The best coverage I feel for Navy overall. And being that we're in San Antonio, Mr. Darden here, we got a certain 4-letter school in UTSA, which of course they're part of the American Athletic Conference, just like Navy. To start the year, UTSA was actually, they were, I guess, predicted to go number 2 in the conference. And it's almost like the tables have turned. And Navy, I think, was expected to finish 11th in the conference, according to the media poll. Man, tables have turned this year because now we see Army definitely undefeated in the conference, Tulane, Navy at 4-0 in the conference. Talk a little bit about Navy football, because we at the press box over at UTSA, we're always watching the Navy and Army games because we're like, where is this coming from, man? And I know Brian Newberry, the coach, you know, second year in, he had a rough first year at 5-7, but it seems like he just turned everything around in year 2 for him.
Yeah, so there's a couple of stories behind that. And number one, first of all, Coach Newberry, he's been there. He came to Navy as a defensive coordinator in 2019 and completely revamped that defense. So interestingly enough, at least for the previous 5 years, the defense has been the strength of the team, whereas before it was always the offense running the triple option. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that kind of figured into a little bit of a stagnation when it came to the offense itself. And some of that had to do with, the pandemic. And we did have some people leave through the transfer portal because they just didn't. It was a very stressful situation being at Navy and the other service academies in that sort of setup, because it's such a regimented and structured environment anyway. But that being said, the thing that made the difference this past year was when the academy finished up their year, Coach Newberry went out and got another offensive coordinator, and the one he ended up hiring was the one he wanted last year, for the 2020 season. But Coach Drew Cronick was not available. He was the head coach at Mercer down in Georgia, and I guess Coach Newberry wasn't convincing enough to pry him away. But after the 2023 season, Coach Newberry went back there on a mission, and he managed to convince Coach Cronick to come on up to Annapolis. And ever since then, it's been just a complete turnaround. And I think what happened here is that the academy, the offense always had talented players, but certainly in that 2023 season, the system that they started shifting to from the triple option just wasn't quite the right fit. But this hybrid wing T that Coach Cronick brought to the academy is, we got a talented quarterback who's option based, and he picked it up very quickly. We've always had very talented slot backs and fullbacks. And the thing I'm most excited about is that this offense allows for more use of the wide receivers and tight ends. So that has been unbelievable. And that's why you see just this explosion in scoring. Just to give you an example, last year, Navy, they averaged 17.6 points per game. This year, they're averaging over 22 points per half. So that's the difference. I would say per game, they're probably still in the low 40s, even though they had a rough one against Notre Dame this past weekend. But it's been just an awesome turnaround and just really exciting to watch them play.
Yeah, going over the scores, they started off the season with Bucknell scored 49, got Temple at 38. The Memphis game was a back and forth game. They ended up pulling it out. They scored 56 on Memphis. UAB, they scored 41, 34 against Air Force, 51 against Charlotte, until we mentioned a little while ago the game against Notre Dame. They were able to muster up just 14 points. But still, starting the season at 6-1, it's a really good season for Navy right now. But last week, seeing that Notre Dame game, when we do our picks, I picked Navy to beat Notre Dame. I told the guys, the way Navy's playing is unreal right now. And the guys are like, no, Notre Dame's on a little mission right now. They were upset by Northern Illinois, and they're still mad about it. But something was telling me about Navy, like, pick Navy. I even think David Robinson was on my shoulder, like, you need to pick Navy. I'll pick Navy. I'll pick Navy. But going into that Notre Dame game, can you kind of break that down? Because I think that's kind of more of a wake-up call for that last part of the season for Navy.
Yeah, the way I saw it, and you're right, going into that game, probably it was Navy's best chance to beat the Irish since they did it in 2016. And I think that even going into that game, I remember writing up when I posted on our class page, on our group Facebook page for Navy Sports Nation, I said, look, regardless of the outcome, I just hope that they don't beat themselves. And of course, that's exactly what happened. You cannot first of all, Navy's got to play near perfect football when it comes to turnovers to beat anybody. Forget Notre Dame, just beat anybody. And when you put it on the ground 5 times against a team like the Irish, who were ranked, I think, 12th at the time, that's just going to be bad for everybody. So it was one of those situations where I don't know if you ever saw that movie, The Replacements, but there was one scene where in the locker room, they were talking about fear, and they asked him, what do you fear the most? And at one point, Keanu Reeves, who is Shane Falco, he raised his hand. He goes, I'm afraid of quicksand. And they go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're playing a game, and then something bad happens, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then before you know it, you're in over your head, and there's no getting out. And that's kind of what that game reminded me of. And the best way to approach it is to watch the film, pull away the lessons from it, and just flush it down the toilet and move forward. So I'm hoping that's what they did, and they can apply those lessons throughout the rest of the year, to your point.
Yeah, and being that they are already at 6 wins, I mean, they're bowl eligible. They've still got Rice in South Florida. Probably the 2 games, and I would say 2 games, Carl, but the last 3 games of the season, Tulane, East Carolina, and of course against Army at the end of the year. It's not. Un, it's easy to say that the schedule just doesn't get any easier, especially in the last 3 games of the season.
That's true. And I tell you, Tulane is always just an absolute brawl. I mean, even if you might see some high scoring, like 5 years ago, we played them, and in fact, it was for another reunion when I was at the academy. I think it was my 35th year reunion. We played Tulane, and Navy beat them 41-38 on a last second field goal.
Yeah.
But it was still a very, very physical game, and I don't expect any less from when Tulane comes to town in a couple of weeks. So that's going to be a tough one. East Carolina is very explosive these days. I mean, they can put up a lot of points in a hurry, and Army as well. I mean, they have a really good quarterback. He's a senior, I believe. Thank God. It'd be nice to get rid of him. but they have a triple option attack as well. It's not quite the same sort of setup as they had in previous years because they brought in a new OC as well. But I think that game could be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past because there's enough of a change to Navy's offense that it's not quite as predictable. And I think that there's a pretty good chance, and I would say this is probably going to be true of both offensive coordinators, that they're probably keeping some stuff in their back pocket that they haven't shown yet for that Army-Navy game because Navy's lost a couple in a row. They upset Army a couple of years ago, back in 2021. They weren't expected to win that game, but they did. And then the last 2 years have gone right down to the wire. So the Mids are going to want to get back on the right track here. They still lead in the series, by the way. I just wanted to make that clear.
Oh, you got if you want to say anything like that, you make it very, very clear to everybody out there. The Army Navy game, obviously, you throw the records out. I mean, you could be undefeated, you could be winless on the season. It's almost like every rivalry game when it comes to like Duke, North Carolina, Texas, and OU. Now this year, Texas and Texas A&M from back in the day, they're renewing their rivalry. So when it comes to rivalry games, the records just go out the door. But previewing that Army-Navy game at the end, a lot of us have never had the opportunity to experience that game. I am well aware because I've seen it on TV. I know it's just hostile. I mean, in a good way, it's hostile because it's a good rivalry. Can you give everybody out there just the best idea you can to describe the atmosphere for that Army-Navy game?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And I know that, and to be quite honest with you, I've not actually been to one live since I graduated, but I can still feel the goosebumps come up whenever I watch it. But just from my own personal experience when I was there, we were fortunate enough between the years of 1980 and 84. So the football seasons would have been 80 through 83. Luckily, Navy never lost to Army. They ended up tying us my sophomore year 3-3. The weather in that game was just miserable. It was like playing on a skating rink. But the other games we handled them pretty easily. But just leading up to it, just the pomp and circumstance, if you want to phrase it that way, with the brigade and the Corps Cadets march on, just all the majestic music. You got all the dignitaries there. You have either the president, vice president, or somebody that's at that level of authority in in American government, coming to watch the game. And it's just, you have the flyovers, the whole 9 yards. And then my senior year, it was actually for the first and only time played out in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, which was an incredible event just from a logistical standpoint. And neither team was really having a very good year, but Navy won that one like 42-13. And so that was nice because I was not a really big fan of going out there for the game if we were going to lose, because it would have been one heck of a long plane ride back. So.
Yeah, I can only imagine the long plane ride back. I mean, the atmosphere it's electrifying.
It is.
I'm
I,
pretty
I
sure.
think electric is a good word. Just everything that's going on, and just especially if you throw in an exciting game on top of that, the fans will just be tied in knots, just waiting for the outcome. But overall, if it's something that if you've never been to an Army Navy game live, it's not a bad idea to put it on your bucket list to check it out.
Yeah, that's going to be on a bucket list for sure. I've got to check it out. And it's crazy because if Navy runs the table to get to that Army game, Army runs the table, you're talking about an undefeated Army team against a one-loss Navy team. The the scale and the magnitude of that game, knowing the CFP, outcome is going to be there. Man, that makes this game just that much more tougher because ideally, can you see both of them making the college football playoffs if Navy's a two-loss team, though?
No, I don't think so. And I will tell you that, given what Boise State's doing out there in the West,
Mhm.
they look pretty good as well. So I'm not really sure how the college football playoff committee would break down, filling those remaining teams. I think that for somebody from the American Conference to go, they would probably have to be undefeated in the conference.
Mhm.
So that probably it's going to leave it right now basically to Tulane, Army, and Navy. They're the only ones who are undefeated right now. So we'll see how that plays out. I don't think that the loss to Notre Dame, even though it was an ugly one, necessarily hurts the Mids all that much because Notre Dame is a
Right.
ranked team. And incidentally, Army does play Notre Dame in a couple of weeks, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform against a common opponent of that caliber, because I
Yeah.
think that'll tell you a lot about how good Army really is. To tell you the truth, I don't know that they've even played a team with a winning record until they end up facing the Irish. I would have to go back and look, but they were able, their first year in the conference, they did not have to play Memphis or Tulane, and so I'm not taking anything away from them. I mean, they're certainly an
Yeah.
explosive team, but I think Notre Dame is going to give us a lot more answers to our questions.
It's kind of crazy because I brought it up now, and I mean the Army schedule was Lehigh, Florida Atlantic, Rice, Temple, Tulsa, UAB, East Carolina. So
Mhm.
I mean, definitely nothing to write home about. I mean, they do have Air Force. Now, a game you could almost circle that Army could trip up on and actually benefit, Navy is the game right before Notre Dame, and that's against North Texas. The North Texas puts up a
Yeah.
lot of points.
Uh-huh.
So that could be a game for everyone in the American Conference to actually circle is North Texas.
Hmm. Yeah. I
Um,
I
go
remember
ahead.
one year, God, I think it was a long time ago. The Navy played North Texas, and the final score was like this. It was in 2007. Oh, we got you. It was 2007, and Navy
Mm.
won like 76 to 64 or something like that. It looked like a basketball score. It was just crazy.
That is North Texas for you.
And
But
I
yeah, the
think,
Notre. Go ahead, sir.
I was gonna say, I think at half, I just laughed thinking about it. At halftime, Navy was behind 49-45.
Oh God.
That's pretty
That
pretty wild.
And that's a score that most teams want to actually score in a whole game is 44 or 45 points,
That's right.
to have that at
Yeah.
halftime. North Texas, Notre Dame, and then Navy at the end of the year. So this second part of the season for Army could be a tough one. You have their toughest part of the schedule coming up here, especially in the last four games. We are talking to Karl Darden. Definitely, he's of Navy Sports Central podcast, NavySportsNation.com is where you can find him at as well. All the Navy coverage. And speaking of Navy, we're going to get to our last topic, and I got to bring it up. I have to bring it up because Spurs fans they'll get to me. They'll DM me every day if I didn't bring it up because how do you not bring up one of San Antonio's favorite guys? The man, the myth, the legend, 7'1" David Robinson. So you were telling me before the show that when you were a senior, David was a freshman coming in. He wasn't really starting, but you still managed to keep track of David as he was playing through Navy over getting into the NBA. But I mean, just being one of the few guys I've ever talked to experience David Robinson in the Naval Academy, You got a backstory behind that for everybody in Spurs Nation? I mean, what do you want to talk about when it comes to David Robinson?
Yeah, I sure do. And I think that well, I'm sure a fair number of people who have followed his career know this already, but he was not heavily recruited to play basketball
Mhm.
at Navy. And when he entered the academy, he was 6'7", and I think a lot of people just figured, okay, he'll go and play and then just go out and do his Navy career and stuff like that. Now, at some point, he just exploded growth wise, certainly
Yeah.
between his freshman and junior years, because coming in for his junior, he was over 7 feet tall. And that actually limited him in terms of what he could do in the Navy. He couldn't go on a submarine, certainly couldn't fly in a plane, and or certain jet planes anyway. And so he ended up going, I believe, into the Civil Engineering Corps and served his time there. And I followed his career from the time he just exploded on a national stage when Navy upset Syracuse in the '86 NCAA tournament, and then they made it all the way to the Elite Eight before bowing out to Duke. But when David Robinson graduated, I knew that he was going to get drafted by somebody. And when the Spurs picked up his drafting rights, I was actually kind of excited because I've always liked the Spurs as an organization. And they were up and down as a team a little bit in the '80s, but once he finished up his obligation with the Navy, Robinson joined the team, and that was really where the franchise started to kind of level set itself and really make a move, because the record, they went from like a 60 loss team to a 60 win team pretty quickly. And then, of course, when Tim Duncan joined them in, I believe, what was it, 1994, 95?
97. Yeah.
97. That's right, because he was
97.
a freshman at Wake Forest in 94. My fault.
Mhm.
But yeah, they ended up winning in 99. And then it was funny because in the 2000s, they were like kind of on this odd year kick, 2003, 2005, 2007. So I said, hey, is it an odd year? Because if it is, the Spurs got a pretty good shot this year,
You're right. The
Yeah.
odd year.
But
It was,
I love David Robinson from the time he started playing, and just a model individual. I mean, certainly, I'm not one for a lot of fan worship or anything like that, but there's a couple of people I really respect in this day in pro sports, and he was one of them.
yeah. The one story behind David is the fact that when the Spurs drafted him, he wasn't coming over right away. He had to fulfill his obligation to the United States Navy. And there was always a fear that he wouldn't sign with the Spurs, that he
Mhm.
would just go with another team. It was so kind of messy there. And I remember Spurs fans, I was young. I mean, at that time, I was probably, I was born in 79. He was drafted in 88, I believe. So 9, 10
Yeah.
years old. And the fact of, okay, well, we drafted him, we have his rights, but there's still no telling if he's going to want to play basketball or even want to play for the Spurs. He could want to play for somebody else. Luckily, he came in. And the one thing that a lot of people will remember, Mr. Darden, is the fact that David saved San Antonio Spurs basketball, because
Mhm.
there was a point where the Spurs wanted to relocate. And I think it was to Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And yeah, David was pretty much saying, you know what? I only want to play in San Antonio. That's it.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
team was kept here. They had another new owner. Everything was kept. It was just kept in San Antonio. So
Right.
yeah, he
Yeah.
basically saved Spurs basketball, from a
Right.
lot of
Right.
people's perspective. So yeah,
Right.
great guy, 100%. One of the best persons in San Antonio. We are talking to Karl Darden, NavySportsNation.com, Navy Sports Nation, and also Navy Sports Central podcast. Mr. Darden, parting words for everybody at Sweep the League, because I've had a great time, and I do look forward to talking to you again, hopefully at the end of the year, and we see Navy possibly in that CFP right there.
Yeah, I would definitely like to do that. And I meant to tell you this earlier when we first started talking, but you are way too formal, man. My name's Karl. You can, because you get to refer to me as Mr. Darden. That's fine. That's cool. But anyway, yes, I think that the last thing I wanted to say was, first of all, thanks again for having me on the show. It was really a
Sure.
nice surprise. And secondly, I would encourage anybody who is not familiar with Navy sports to, I mean, they have different teams that play on both CBS Sports Network and also on ESPN Plus. And a lot of these sports kind of fly underneath the radar. but there are some terrific athletes at these service academies, and Navy in particular, because I mean, I'll give you just a quick example. Our rugby team just got varsity status a couple of years ago, and they won the NCAA equivalent of the national championship 2 years ago, defeating California.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I mean, and they made it back to the championship game this past year, but they came up short. But they're undefeated this year. So there's a lot of athletes, whether it's rugby, whether it's swimming, rowing. I mean, I could name a bunch of them. And one of the reasons I started this podcast and the blog that goes with it is because I wanted to put the spotlight on these folks that, I mean, they're elite athletes that most people have never even heard of. So give it if you happen to be cruising ESPN Plus and you see a Navy game up there, check it out. You'll be pretty pleased with what you see. You'll be pretty pleased with what you see, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody out there, check out Navy sports just in general. I mean, their football team obviously is on a roll, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to Karl Darden at the end of the year. And maybe when we get him back, they're in, like we said, the final 12. And that'd be a whole lot of talking to go around there, because knowing they'll probably have to play teams like your Texas Longhorns and possibly Georgia, but right now Boise State is probably the Cinderella team. But there's also another Cinderella team that's actually the official team of Sweep the League right now, and that's the Indiana Hoosiers. Man, they're playing unbelievable.
They're playing
but
really well. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, we just can't stop talking about them for whatever reason. One of the guys lives in Indiana, and he told us at the beginning of the year, watch out for this team. They're going to do something. We said, come on, it's Indiana.
Have they lost a game yet? I don't know.
Knock on wood, they have not lost the game yet.
Okay.
And that's, they've got, I believe, Michigan this weekend, maybe Michigan. So I know they have Ohio State on the schedule, which Ohio State plays Penn State this week. So who knows? We're going to see what happens for the rest of the year for the Hoosiers. But Mr. Darden, I appreciate you joining us here today at Sweep the League. We do look forward to talking to you again sometime. Love to have you on. Maybe even love to have you on an actual Sweep the League show. Bring you on here. You can talk to us for the guys as well and talk about Navy, because one of our guys is Derek Gervin, George Gervin's brother.
All right.
He knows a little bit about David Robinson. So some of the stories y'all could share probably would be amazing there.
Right. Okay. Well, I would be happy to do that anytime, Rudy. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I appreciate everybody joining us here for Sweeps Unplugged. Again, a brand new podcast that we're bringing to you guys. We're just unplugging ourselves from everything else that we talk about, getting to know people in the podcast world, getting to know everybody else as well out there, whether it be entertainment, sports, anything, no matter what. Continue to plug into Sweeps Unplugged, because we're going to provide you with everything here for Mr. Karl Darden, Rudy Compost Jr., until we sweep the league and, well, plug ourselves back into Sweeps Unplugged. We'll see you later, guys.
Exclusive interviews with Rudy and the crew. Let's go. Exclusive interviews with Rudy and the crew.